So again, today is Tuesday, the 29th. We're going to start going over the textbook, the 7th edition. But I wanted to show you, I gave you all a flash drive with that, and also it's got what's what I called a URL list. And if you look up here, this is what's in that URL list. Cut down the size on this. All right. There are W3 Schools tutorials, a thing called Quackit, their tutorials, TiZag tutorials, tutorials, point tutorials, and Java2S.com. So why am I giving you all that stuff? Everybody learns in different ways, and I get that. So this was, if you go out to the W3 Schools site, on the W3Schools.com, that's where those are from. So this is the first link that's on, one of the links that's on there is the Learn HTML, there's the Learn CSS, there's the Learn Bootstrap, there's the Learn JavaScript, and there's the Learn jQuery. These are really good, and what's nice about these tutorials is they're simplistic. And they all have code examples for everything they show you, and they encourage you to use their code. They have no problem at all with you doing that. So that's the first one. Quackit, and it's kind of funny because with Quackit.com, what they used to have at Quackit.com is they used to literally have a duck that would kind of fly across the screen. A little hokey, but again, they've got a nice HTML tutorial, they've got a CSS tutorial, they've got a JavaScript tutorial, and they've got a Bootstrap tutorial. That's pretty good. You've got all those URLs. TiZag is another one. I found this years ago. These, again, are very simplistic tutorials. So we're going over something in class. You don't understand it. Either you don't, you feel funny about asking, you don't want to ask, whatever. Or you ask and I still don't answer it to your satisfaction. I hope if that's the case, you ask again. But otherwise, TiZag is a good one to start at too because they're pretty simplistic. All right. There's a place that's called tutorialspoint.com. If you look up on the screen here, you'll notice they have a few tutorials. All right. I don't know how many there are there. I don't really care. I'd say about 40 or so. But they have really good tutorials on HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, and some of these are quite lengthy, just so you know. Probably the smallest tutorial out of the ones I just mentioned is 100 pages. All right, so they're pretty big, but there's a lot of information in them. And finally, I found this a long time ago when I was looking for something else. There's a site that's called Java2S.com, which for whatever reason doesn't appear like it wants to come up right now. But it's a simple site. They've got stuff in there for almost anything that's information technology related. So if you want JavaScript, if you want HTML, if you want Java, there. Okay, so yes, it did come up. There's the JavaScript stuff, and there's some Java stuff. There's HTML. There's a lot of sites. But the ones I gave you, they're going to be more than sufficient for what you need. All right? Okay. So let's go in and start on the book. I'm literally going to go to the beginning of Chapter 1. So as I mentioned, if you have your book, your hard copy, you can use that. It may be a little bit different. Okay? Sorry if it is, but it may be a little bit different. Yesterday we went over, it was kind of a weird period because it was a long orientation. You had to get your badges, etc. We talked about the syllabus. I had problems with the, and I found out what the problem was. Of course, there was something I never plugged in. So it was all on me. All right. Charles thought it was kind of funny, but he's real good about that. He's patient with me. So Chapter 1, there'll be no test on this, no anything. It's an introduction to the internet and the World Wide Web. It's not my goal in here, like when they show chapter objectives, to sit and read these to you. I think you can all read those, or you have them in your book, or you have them electronically. This chapter is a very general, a very generic chapter. All right? And much of the stuff that's in here, just so you know, is hardware. This is the only chapter in the book that touches at all on hardware. In fact, this is probably the only chapter that we'll cover in the entire 4 semesters that deals with any hardware. All right? So they go through there, and again, I'm guessing that by now you all know what the internet is. let me ask you this. How many people here, raise your hand, unless you feel funny about raising it or not raising, know what an intranet is? All right, okay? We have an intranet here at Rankin. Basically, it's kind of an internet, but it's only for our institution. All right? How many of you have ever heard of an extranet? All right? An example of an extranet, think of a place like, I don't know, let's say Walmart. Okay, I think you'd agree that Walmart must literally deal with hundreds, if not thousands, if not more different types of companies. All right? And let's suppose that they've got deals with Pepsi, Coke, etc. kind of things. They might have a connection between them, but it's private in that they don't want, for example, Deerbergs to be able to see the prices that they have so that they can undercut them. So there's the internet that everybody uses. There's an intranet that typically is company-wide, and there's an extranet that's typically more private and it's between companies. All right, just so you hear those terms. Okay, they talk about the birth of the web here. If you've never heard this guy's name before, Tim Berners-Lee. You know, it's funny. I used to tell this story and people would shake their heads, but now you're all too young. Years ago, there was a show on TV, and you may have heard about it. It was called American Bandstand. All right, and you know they showcased talent. Didn't matter, you know, up and coming talent, etc. And the guy who hosted it was named Dick Clark. You may have seen him. He used to be on those specials, those New Year's Eve specials, but he died a few years ago. The point is, Dick Clark, they asked him once, "Are you the father of rock and roll?" And he said, "I'm not the father of rock and roll, but I like to look at it that when rock and roll was born, I was there at the delivery." Okay? That's kind of what Tim Berners-Lee is. He's known as being the father of the internet. He's really not, but he helped bring along the idea. He envisioned being able to hyperlink documents together. That's the way the internet actually started. All right? And there's more to it. I don't really know if it pays to go over any more of it or not, but just so you know. All right. Does everybody understand that whenever you type in a URL into your computer and you type in www, that stands for World Wide Web? Okay? Does anybody know before you put that in, sometimes you put in HTTP or HTTPS. Do you know what HTTP stands for? You do. What is it?
Hypertext Transfer Protocol.
Right, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. All right, what it is, it's what's referred to as a request response mechanism. For instance, now I wouldn't expect you to do this, I wouldn't ask you to do this, but if I said, "Hey, Jesse, would you go downstairs and get me a soda? Here's $2, keep the change." So he goes down, gets me a soda, brings it back. I've made a request to him, he's given me a response back. That's how this stuff works. So when I come in here and I type in, it's more than you need, but I type in http://www.rankin.edu and I hit enter, it's going to hopefully, that's interesting, bring up Rankin's website. Okay? So I'm making the HTTP request, their servers are taking it and giving me a response back. What's funny is that didn't come up, but sometimes when that doesn't, if you just come in and type in just rankin.edu, that works. All right? And it might be because I'm inside of Rankin here. I don't know. I don't really care. All right? I've also told them what I think of their full motion video that I don't think is very good. But, all right. So who runs the internet? The answer is basically no one. There are people in charge of certain administrative functions, but no one technically runs it. No one technically owns it. Now, I may say things during your tenure here, and if I do, and if it upsets you, I'm sorry. I'm not a Trump guy, okay? I'm just not. And if you are, that's fine. That's your right. But some of the things that have happened under his administration that you may or may not have heard about, all right, yesterday, they just allowed it. It's only going to be in 2 states for right now. I think it's Virginia and Maryland. The police can now come into your house, and they can search it without a warrant. They can just break in. I think that's wrong. All right. The other thing that he has tried to do is he's tried to basically give different companies like cable companies, etc., the rights to all of your information, and they can share that information with anyone they see fit. I don't think that's right either. And part of it, that he's even admitted that part of it is he wants to be able to go out and sue people who have said things against him that are mean. I don't think that's right either. All right, I think when that stuff happens, we start living in a police state. And I just think that's wrong. All right, but the point is, right now, no one technically owns the internet. That could actually change. All right, that's scary. Okay, there's all sorts of stuff that's been talked about for years. There's the intranet, there's the extranet. What you're going to find is probably their definitions and mine aren't going to be exactly the same. I don't like reading out of books. All right, so web standards and accessibility. This is unbelievably important today when you talk about accessibility. All right, the idea is anyone should have the right to be able to use the internet. People who are blind. I've actually, not in here, but at the school I used to be at, I had a blind student. She had her dog with her, and she had a software package that's called JAWS, which stood for something. The thing, it really bugged people, because if she was going to like type in hello, you'd hear this, and I can't even do the voice justice, but it was like Hello. So every time she typed anything, they heard all that. She couldn't turn it down because she had to hear it to make sure it was correct. And it drove people nuts. But the idea is she was as welcome to take a class at the college I was at as anybody else. In the same way, everyone is entitled to use the internet. So especially the more public your company is, the more you have to strive to make it compliant to anyone who has any kind of, we'll just call it an impairment. All right? So they talk about a few things in here on page 5. They talk about things like the ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act, and there's a lot of different stuff in there. All right? If you're interested, I already mentioned that W3 Schools site, but if you go to w3c.org, that's the World Wide Web Consortium's site. All right, that's the good news. The bad news is it's written by technical writers. It's some of the most boring stuff you'll ever read. But it's really fact-filled. So if you want more information on any of this stuff, you can go out there. All right. They talk on the bottom of page 5, and again, I'm going by the regular book here, but it's right here too, this universal design for the web. The idea today is there's so many different companies that are competing for your business. So if I decide that let's say that I want to buy a basketball, all right, and I want to go online to do it, there probably are at least 10 or 20 different companies. I mean, there's the big ones that you hear, like I could go to Walmart, I could go to Dick's Sporting Goods, etc. And there's a lot of smaller ones. They're all competing for the same market share. So it's really important when they talk about this universal design for the web, you want to make the user's experience as good for them as possible. In fact, there is a whole thing that started today. People they're called UX designers. UX is the user experience. All right. Information on the web, bottom of page 6 and going on to page 7. Yes, sir.
Just a question. Are we allowed to go into the actual regular Wi-Fi, or do we just use guest?
Okay, you asked that before. I'll ask Charles what he wants you to do during the break. I would just do the guest for right now, and I'll make sure I get the right password from him during the break. Okay? All right. Years ago, she's been gone several years, but my wife had an aunt, name was Marcella, and she was about as old and straight-laced as it can get. But we'd go over to her house once in a while, and she didn't read a newspaper, she read the National Enquirer. And she believed basically everything it said. She's a nice lady, all right? But the point is, sometimes grabbing stuff off the internet is like grabbing it from the National Enquirer. People can put anything they want out there. And to be fair to President Trump, some of the news that's out there is fake news. All right? There are people that are out there saying things and putting things out there that are just false. So they talk about on the bottom of page 6, going on to page 7, is the organization credible? All right? So if you're going to get news from someplace, who did they get it from? You know, when you see stuff, an unnamed source, and it's on some website you've never heard of before, you may or may not trust it. How recent is the information? Are there links to additional information? Okay. Is it Wikipedia? Have you ever gone out to Wikipedia? Right here. If you haven't, I'd do it right now if I were you. It's an online encyclopedia. It's wikipedia.org. wikipedia.org. And you can actually get an account and make changes to what's out there. Okay? Is it 100% reliable? No. In fact, some of the page, sometimes you'll go and you'll look up something in there and they'll say, this page is currently under construction. All right. All right. Ethical use of information on the web. Okay. Is it acceptable to copy someone's graphic to use on your own website? Not no, hell no. You can get sued for that. All right. Is it acceptable to copy someone else's website design to use on your own site or a client's site? The answer they say is no. Technically, it is no. But what happens is a lot of times I've had this happen before. I'll try to get a student an internship, paid or unpaid, but they're going to go and create a new website for a brand new company. And we bring the person in here who owns the company or the people who own the company. We say, what are you looking for? And they're like, I really have no idea. Okay? So what we tell them to do is go out and look at their competitors and see what they like that's in their competitor's site. And then you use that as a baseline. So you're not copying colors or fonts or anything, but you're copying concepts, the way things are laid out. That is actually considered to be okay. All right. Is it acceptable to copy an essay that appears on a web page and use it or parts of it as your own writing? No. The high school where my kids went, they literally spent $250,000. And it's a good school. But they spent $250,000. They were finding out that on average, 35% of the students were plagiarizing some to all of their essays and stuff that they were being assigned. So they got this, and you can feed in any student's paper into it, and it'll tell you how much of it was pulled directly from the web. Okay? Now, that said, and maybe you've done this in high school or whatever, maybe you haven't, I always think it's okay if I go and read an article that's on the web, and I paraphrase it or give my own thoughts on it, that's okay. Or if I want to go and grab a few sentences from it, as long as I give attribution to it, that's considered okay. But passing off somebody else's stuff as your own, not okay. Is it acceptable to insult someone on your website or link to that person's site in a derogatory manner? Of course not. There's actually a thing that's called netiquette. You all know probably what etiquette is. You know, which fork do you use, stuff like netiquette is the etiquette you use on the internet. All right, you probably have heard this already. You know, yes or no? When you text somebody, you should use all capital letters. No, why not? Because that's considered you yelling at them. Okay? Some people do it anyway for effect. Whatever. Now, there is a thing that's in here, and you don't have to look at it now, but we're going to come back to this in a later chapter. They talk about this Creative Commons. This is kind of important. All right? And the reason that it is they talk in there about things that are out on websites that you are able to use and not have to give any attribution or anything else. It's a pretty good site. All right. The next part that's in here, we're going to run through this very quickly because this is hardware stuff. So they show here basically what a system would look like. Guess what? This is an old picture. All right? Because what's missing from here? A phone, a tablet. All right? You may or may not be aware of this, but it happened about halfway into 2015. Now more people access the internet using tablets and phones than they do using laptops and desktops. Many, you can read, and many books will tell you desktops are dead. All right, they have their place. All right, we still have one, in my house. All right, but it's funny because very, very rarely does anybody use it. All right, I still use the laptop, but I'm doing more and more stuff on my phone. All right, one thing my wife won't let me do is pay stuff electronically. That's just her. It's the way she was raised or whatever. So we, they love us at Walmart, and we still walk in there with our checks. All right, but I don't mind that so much. I mind being in Walmart and having the person in front of me having no idea how to use their debit card. I told this to the lady once, right as a customer was leaving, and I think she heard me and didn't like it. I said, could you have an extra line for idiots that don't know how to use a debit card, and they can go in there and you can kind of give them a quick tutorial? And I said, if you're not going to do that, why can't you just take people who are paying with credit and give them debit, check, whatever, give them their own line? And he goes, that's a really good idea. And then they never did anything with it. So a network is two or more computers that are connected together because you want to be able to have them communicate. All of you in here, whether you realize it or not, and I don't know what you have to do that, but we'll check on it later, but you're all able to print using that printer, all right, from your own machine, okay? Why? Because you'll be networked in that you're able to do that kind of thing. So they show this in here. I'm not the guy to talk to you about switches and routers, all right? Colin told me the other day, he said, I wouldn't mind even taking a class and knowing some more hardware. Then I'd suggest that you do that here, all right, if you want to, because you don't get any hardware in this program. To be fair, you used to get 2 weeks of HTML in their first class. They even removed that. That's all hardware. You get no software in there, all right? So they talk to you about in here what a LAN is, all right? Typically that's computers. We're in a LAN right here, okay? There's physical connections. Now, as you probably guessed, there is no cable that runs from here 40 miles to St. Louis. We're connected, but we're not connected directly. We're connected indirectly. That's not a LAN or a local area network. That's a WAN or a wide area network. All right? So they talk about all that stuff in here. And again, they talk about client-server model, and they show you a picture of it here on the bottom, at least where I've got on page 9. And again, this is what I mentioned to you before. That's the HTTP request that goes from a client to a server someplace. The server gives back an HTTP response. That's exactly what they're talking about right there. I mean, there's some other stuff in here. They talk about internet protocols. Anybody ever use FTP? Have you ever heard of the term FTP? All right, let's assume for a second that I wanted to go out to a website and they had something out there that I wanted to be able to copy, okay? And they let me do it, but they don't do it using HTTP. They do it using what's called FTP, or the File Transfer Protocol. If I don't have to log in, that's what's called an anonymous FTP request. So I'm able to download stuff from their system, but since I'm not logging in, they don't let me upload. Does that make sense? I can't send it to them. Some FTP sites, you have to log in and have an account. Then typically you can both download from their site and upload to their site. So sometimes rather than seeing the HTTP:// you'll see an FTP://. So that's what that is. All right. They talk about email protocols. Again, if you want to read more about those, I'll let you do that. The HTTP I've already mentioned to you. The TCP/IP, again, it's more hardware stuff. It's not that it's bad stuff, all right? It's just that I don't think it's exactly relevant to the program that we're in here. So if you want to read that stuff, I'm going to let you go read it on your own. And to be honest with you, you say, hey, I've got some questions about IP6. Then I would probably what I would do would be to wait until Mr. Schaefer-Cotter, who's in this class after we are, the instructor there, when he comes in, he can answer virtually any hardware question I've ever had. All right? All right. Page 13, they talk about uniform resource identifiers and domain names. These are things that you should start understanding. I already mentioned the HTTP://. That's the HTTP protocol. You may have also seen, you ever gone out to a site that instead of HTTP, it says HTTPS? Okay? That's a secure connection. All right? In other words, it's a little bit more encrypted than an HTTP is. So, anytime anybody asks you for any personal information, social security number, credit card number, etc., well, you should always make sure it says HTTPS and not HTTP. All right? Because it's going to be harder with HTTPS for them to get to your information. Then there's www. All right? Then you've got your domain name. For instance, rankin.edu. All right? Sometimes you'll also have folders and you'll have file names in there, But they mention that a domain name locates an organization or other entity on the internet. So in other words, the people from Rankin years ago had to register the domain name rankin.edu. That makes sense? All right. I'm not going to do this, but it was funny because somebody said, well, how do you know if something's even available? So I went out, and I don't even want to know if it's still there or not. But I went out, this was a few years ago, and I typed in www.jeffscott.com. And it was this chunky little guy who's an Elton John impersonator. All right, and I thought, geez, I don't even want that domain if it ever becomes available. All right, but you can always check and see whether or not a site is available. So if Colin wanted to know, I don't know, Fugner, is that how you pronounce it? So if he wanted to know if colinfugner.com was available, he could literally type in colinfugner.com, or I'd probably try http://www.colinfugner.com. All right, and if it comes up that it's not found, it probably is available. Now, the funny thing is, if you've ever done this, some people do that. They'll go out to GoDaddy and other sites, and they'll check and see if a site's available, okay? And then they come back maybe a half an hour later, and it's gone. Because there are people who make their career out of grabbing, when people go and they ask if something's available, there are people who check those because you can see the requests that have been made, and they buy those. It's called cyber squatting. What's that? Yeah, that's what they want. Okay, all right, and again, as much as I might criticize the guy, I'll give Trump credit. I don't know if you ever heard that this even happened. This is no joke. During the, I thought this was hilarious, but I've just got a weird sense of humor. During the presidential campaign, you may or may not have heard of this, JebBush.com, he let his domain name lapse. Trump bought it, which I thought was unbelievably smart. And so when you went out to JebBush.com, it pushed you out to Trump's site, which I thought was that was one of the coolest things I'd ever heard. All right? But there are people who do that. They cyber squat. All right? All right. Top level domain names. So here's some things that you can look at. It used to be, when you look at the stuff that's in here, there was .com, there was .gov, .net, and .org. And there really wasn't much more than that. Now there's all sorts of different, all right, top-level domain names, okay, or types. There's also country codes that are available out there, all right? Now, again, this is getting into more complexity than I want to get into, but I do want to mention just one thing to you, and this is the bottom in your book, on the bottom of page 15 to the middle of page 16. And they talk about a DNS. A DNS is a domain name system. If I go in and I type in www.rankin.edu, hit enter, I'm making an HTTP request that's got to be answered by the Rankin server, one of their servers, and it has to give me a response back. We already mentioned that. That should make sense to you. But remember, the only thing the computer can understand are zeros and ones. So that rankin.edu has got to be changed into a bunch of zeros and ones that the computer can understand. Well, it also only understands those with zeros and ones and stuff. It also only understands what's called an IP, or an Internet Protocol address. So, for example, rankin.edu has got to be changed to something like 123.231.231.67 or something like that. That's what the domain name system does. All right? It puts stuff into a way that the system can understand it. So they show you accessing the web page, and there's a picture. I guess it's not in here, but it's in the book on page 16. But again, it's that request response system. All right? All right, now let's get to the important stuff, so to speak. All right? So I'm on the middle of page 16 if you're looking in the book, and it's on markup languages. Now, back in the beginning, there was a language called SGML, which stood for Standard Generalized Markup Language. And it was, the G in there was what's important. It was really general. But it was a language that was used by other languages, all right, such as HTML. That's what we're learning in here. That's what a lot of this class is HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. All right, we're going to go into it and actually start writing some stuff when we get into Chapter 2. Well, in about the mid-90s, people said, you know what, this HTML, it ain't cutting it. You know, what we need more power than what we have. So somebody came up and said, you know what, we need a new HTML. We need something that's better. HTML, you've got about 120, 130 tags. We need to make our own tags. So they came up with a language called XML, which stands for Extensible Markup Language. And it's still used today, but it never really was as popular as people thought that it would be. So around the year 2000, the same people who yelled and said, you know, this HTML stinks, said, you know what, maybe it's not so bad. So they came back and they upgraded it, and that was kind of where HTML5 was born. Now, they'll say that it was later than this, all right, but it really did start in around the year 2000. And there were two different groups that were working on it at the time. And they kind of converged together in about 2005, 2007, somewhere in there. And in around 2010, that's when HTML5 started taking shape. And they tried to fix some of the problems that they thought were with HTML. All right? So, popular uses of the web. E-commerce. I'm not going to ask, but I wouldn't be that surprised if I did ask. What's going on there? I wouldn't be that surprised if I did ask, how many of you have ever gone out here before? I'd be more surprised if I found out that none of you ever did. The one thing about it, and you're all, I mean, I'm sure there's a variance in your age, but you're all pretty much the same age in here. One thing that's changed between your generation and mine, all right, if you don't know this, you know, you can see it on TV, malls are dying. They literally are, all right? A couple weeks ago, I was out in Chesterfield, and I went by the mall. It's amazing how few cars, it was a Saturday, and you would have thought it was like a Tuesday night, or a Tuesday during the day, I should say, all right? And that's because people today, I mean, my kids, my daughter, oh, this is a cool dress. Look, it comes in these 3 colors. She buys all 3. None of them fit. So what does she? She doesn't even return them. She just keeps them. And that's what Amazon's counting on. If you don't like something, you're not going to return it, because most people don't. All right, but e-commerce is by far the number one use, you know, of the web. I mean, it's $1 billion industry. Mobile access, you know, again, tablets, phones, etc. It's funny, remember when I asked that yesterday, how many of you have a phone here where I can send that to you? Basically, I think every hand went up. All right. This woman that my daughter works with, I met her, and her kids are 5 and 3. The 5-year-old has a phone. I think personally that's ridiculous. But the 3-year-old, it felt bad, so she bought the 3-year-old his own tablet. And it's not a little kid tablet, it's a regular tablet. I think that's ridiculous. All right? To each their own, I guess. Blogs. All right, a blog, basically an online journal type of thing. Blogs come in many different forms, varieties. Wikis, as it says, it's a website that can be updated immediately at any time by visitors. Sound familiar? Wikipedia is an example of a wiki. Some call them a wiki. It doesn't really matter. All right. Social networking. Again, I'm not going to ask, but my guess is that everybody in this room either is on Facebook or has used Facebook, or at least intimately knows somebody who uses Facebook. All right. It's funny, we had an in-service last week, and we were talking about social media, and we broke off into our groups, so it was just all the information technology people. And I said I had gone out, for the heck of it, I went out to Rankin on Facebook. And man, there were like 4 comments in a row. This place really sucks. And it was like, they were just, and everyone was worse than the rest. They don't have any full-time instructors there, and the few they do have don't know diddly about anything. I said, you know, that's probably, you probably want some people saying good things about you on Facebook. You know, so maybe you would want us to encourage our students or whatever. All right. The cloud. One thing I taught this summer, I taught a week-long class to middle schoolers right here, well, really in the other building that you were in yesterday. And I had 15 kids, and I taught them how to use a product that's called Android App Inventor 2, where you can create actual Android apps and you don't have to write any code. It's all drag and drop. And I spent a week teaching them that stuff. And they were like, this is really cool. How do I save this stuff? It's all saved for you automatically out into the cloud. Some people get afraid of the cloud because it's like there's not a lot of security there. There can be, depending on how it's set up. Sometimes you put stuff out in the cloud and it's available to anybody. RSS, you may or may not have ever heard of that. All right, really simple syndication, or some call it rich site summary. Maybe you've seen this. For instance, what some people probably did. Let's suppose when the hurricane was Harvey, when it happened, let's suppose that you had a relative in Houston. You might have put on CNN.com and you might have been following what's happening there every few minutes. That's an RSS feed that you're using to do that. All right. Podcasts, which typically are just audio types of things, interviews, etc. Web 2.0 is not that big a thing anymore. And that's it. So we went through that fairly quickly, but I have a question for you. Was there anything that we just went over that didn't make sense? All right. What you're going to find is in the first year of the program, especially in this class, you're kind of getting your feet wet. So there's going to be more lecture. The second year of the program, I told people yesterday, I asked them, I said, okay, you ready? And they were like, yeah. So I said, these are the chapters we're going to cover in the book. And they said, okay. I said, now we're going to have a website review. And they said, okay. I said, good. Get yourself set up. And we wrote a website yesterday. That was day one. So that's what we do more of here. As we get going in here, I'd like to do less and less talking, and I'd like to have us do more and more actual work. You learn by hands-on. All right? So I'm going to go into Chapter 2. We'll go till about 8:50, 8:55, so 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll take a break. What I'm going to do, though, is, in case I think I told you, I'm taping everything I'm doing. So far I've gone 36 minutes, okay? I'm going to stop now and I'll start the tape up again. And the reason for me doing that is I can now call this Chapter 1. But I don't want to have half of this be Chapter 1 and half of it be Chapter 2 and then finish Chapter 2 after the break. I don't want to do that, all right? So you'll see me do that occasionally.